Hey guys, tonight we climb toward a temple whose steps seem to float between the night sky and the first blush of dawn. The air is still, yet charged, as if the stones themselves are holding their breath. A slow, steady chant rises from above, low enough to make the air vibrate in your chest. The scent of burning copal drifts down the stairs in pale ribbons, mixing with the cool edge of morning. Somewhere behind you, the city is waking. But here on the slope of this pyramid, time has decided to pause. You probably wouldn't make it as a local, not because of danger, but because these stairs seem to have been designed by someone with a personal vendetta against knees. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, post your location and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where in the world you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You place a hand on the first step. The stone is cool, smooth in some places, worn in others where countless feet have climbed with purpose. Above, the silhouette of the temple's roof comb cuts against a sky shifting from indigo to pale gold. The chants grow clearer as you ascend, not a single melody, but many voices weaving together into something that feels older than the pyramid itself. At the midway landing, you pause to catch your breath. From here, the plaza spreads out below. Vendors setting up stalls, guards pacing along the causeways, children darting between columns like mischievous hummingbirds. Yet even the city's bustle is muted here, as if the pyramid is wrapped in an invisible shell of reverence. Mainstream historians agree that such temples, especially in Aztec and Maya cities, were considered the axis of the world, physical points where the realms of earth, sky, and underworld touched. The steps weren't just stairs, they were a path of ascent, mirroring the spiritual journey the rituals above would enact. A priest appears at the top, robes of white and red catching the early light. He lifts a hand, not to stop you, but to signal welcome. The quirky thing. Some accounts suggest that certain priests train their voices to echo off the stone, making commands sound as though they came from the gods themselves. Historians still argue whether this was intentional acoustic design or just a happy accident of limestone geometry, but either way, it would make a fantastic stage trick. As you climb the final stretch, the air grows thicker with incense. The sweet, resinous smoke curls into your hair, your clothes, your breath. At the summit, the view is dizzying. The city unfurls in every direction, roads like pale ribbons disappearing into the jungle or across the lakeshore. The temple platform is wide, the altar at its center draped with cloth embroidered in symbols you don't yet understand. The priests move with quiet precision, adjusting objects, placing bowls of flowers in maize. One kneels to draw a circle in ash, another scatters petals inside it. Every motion seems part of a choreography learned over years, passed down through hands that have performed it countless times before. The chant changes, dropping into a slower, deeper rhythm that seems to anchor your heartbeat. You glance toward the horizon just as the sun's rim breaks free of the earth. Light spills across the platform, striking the altar first, then the faces of the priests, then your own. In that moment, the air feels heavier, as though you've stepped into a room where the walls are made of sky and expectation. The ceremony has not begun yet, but it has already started to happen to you. The sun creeps higher, gilding the temple stones until they seem to hum with heat. The chanting settles into a measured pace, like the city's pulse has found its resting rhythm. A senior priest steps forward, older than the others, his robe heavy with embroidered symbols of serpents, maize, and the sun. He holds a staff topped with a small disc of jade, which catches the light and scatters it in green sparks across the platform. You follow him with your eyes as he walks to the altar, lays the staff across it, and begins to speak. His voice is deep, steady, and oddly soothing, the kind that can make even the most unsettling ideas sound like warm advice. He talks of balance, of the endless exchange between people and gods. In his telling, the world is a contract, and every dawn is a signature renewed. Mainstream historians agree that for both the Aztec and Maya, offerings, including human sacrifice, were seen not as punishment, but as a sacred transaction. The gods had given their own essence to create the world. Humans, in return, were expected to offer life back to sustain it. Without this exchange, it was believed the sun could falter, the rains could vanish, and the cycles that fed the world might simply stop turning. You step closer, drawn in despite the weight of the words. Around you, the other priests stand like pillars, their faces calm, eyes fixed on the speaker. He lifts a bowl filled with maize kernels, letting them run through his fingers so they patter against the altar like soft rain. The seed gives to the earth, and the earth returns the seed, he says. So must the people give, so must the gods return. Your quirky tidbit comes from a younger priest standing nearby, who leans over just enough to murmur that the maize kernels used in this morning's rite were counted one by one at dawn, and if anyone lost count, the whole process started over. Historians still argue whether such meticulousness was purely symbolic or just the priesthood's way of keeping apprentices from sneaking extra breakfast. The senior priest gestures toward the four directions, naming each aloud. At each cardinal point stands a smaller altar, one with flowers, one with a jar of water, one with a torch, and one with a bowl of earth. These offerings, he explains, are the building blocks of existence, the domains to which all life belongs and will eventually return. His voice softens when he speaks of water, hardens when he speaks of fire. You feel the crowd on the plaza below leaning into every word, though they can barely hear him. A breeze snakes across the platform, teasing the edges of the altar cloth. The priest catches it with a palm as if it's a message from the gods. He turns to face the sun, eyes closed, arms outstretched. The chant resumes, slower now, almost conversational, as though the priests are explaining something to the morning itself. Historians still debate whether the priests truly believed the gods required life to continue the cosmos, or whether the rituals also served a political purpose, reinforcing the priesthood's role as indispensable mediators between divine and mortal realms. Standing here, watching the precision, the devotion, and the calm certainty on every face, you realize the answer might be both. Faith and authority aren't strangers in this place. They're partners who built the staircase you just climbed. The senior priest opens his eyes. The gods gave breath, he says, and breath must be returned. His words hang in the air like a held note. Around you, the incense smoke thickens, curling upward toward the sun, a reminder that in this world, even air can be an offering. The senior priest steps back, and another figure takes his place, a younger man with a tall headdress shaped like the beak of a heron. In his hands, he carries a folded bark paper codex, its pages covered in painted glyphs that shimmer faintly in the sunlight. He opens it with care, as though it's alive, and you see intricate columns of dates and symbols, suns, serpents, crossed lines, and tiny human figures posed in ways you can't quite decode. He begins to read aloud, voice crisp and deliberate, marking each word with a flick of the wrist toward the sky. You realize he's reciting the sacred calendar, naming the sequence of days leading to this one. Every name is like a rung on a ladder, each step connecting the present moment to an origin in mythic time. Mainstream historians note that both the Aztec Tonalpohualli and the Maya Tzolk'in, sacred calendars of 260 days, played a central role in determining when sacrifices could occur. Certain combinations of day signs and numbers were considered especially potent, their meanings tied to deities, celestial events, or mythic histories. This wasn't about picking a convenient morning, it was about catching the universe at exactly the right moment, as if the gods had penciled in an appointment. The heron-headed priest points toward the east, where the sun is now clear of the horizon, and calls out a date that sounds like poetry. 4 read under the gaze of the feathered serpent. A murmur of recognition runs through the other priests. This is no ordinary day. It's one aligned with the power of renewal and the promise of the rains. You sense that this alignment is as much a reason for the ceremony as the offering itself. Your quirky tidbit comes when an apprentice behind you whispers, not to you exactly, but to himself, that last year's ceremony had to be delayed because a cloud formation on the appointed morning resembled a turtle instead of the expected serpent. Whether that was a divine sign or simply a case of once you see it, you can't unsee it, historians still argue whether such interruptions were strictly religious or occasionally creative scheduling. The heron-headed priest traces a line in the air from the sun to the altar, then to the 4 smaller altars at the platform's edges. He speaks of the calendar as if it's a living map, not just of time but of space, linking the city to the heavens and the underworld all at once. The codex, in his telling, isn't a record, it's a conversation. And today, the conversation says the veil between worlds is thinner than usual. Below, in the plaza, a crowd begins to form in ordered rows. They can't see the codex from here, but they know what its reading means. The moment has been chosen. The day is awake. The priest closes the codex and hands it to an attendant, who tucks it into a carved wooden case shaped like a jaguar's head. The case's eyes are inlaid with shell, catching the sun in sudden flashes. It's not just storage, it's a guardian. You wonder how many centuries these rituals have passed without losing their place in the calendar. Historians still debate how much flexibility priests had in interpreting these signs, whether the dates were fixed in advance or if the right moment could be declared when circumstances felt auspicious. Standing here, watching every motion treated like a key turning in a lock, it's hard to imagine anything being left to whim. The day feels inevitable, like a stone rolling down a slope toward the altar. The heron-headed priest steps aside. A conch shell sounds from the plaza below, low, resonant, and final. It's the signal that all preparation is past, and the city is now in step with the god's own clock. The sun stands higher, the shadows shorter, and the air heavier. You know without being told, from this point on, everything will move toward the moment the calendar has promised. From the far side of the platform, a small group emerges, not priests this time, but attendants in bright cotton garments edged with feathers. They walk in pairs, each holding a staff decorated with ribbons, their steps matching the slow beat of a hand drum somewhere below. Between them, you see the ones chosen for today's ceremony. They are not bound, nor do they stumble. Instead, they move with an odd serenity, as if their bodies already know the steps of this day. Each wears a garland of flowers at the shoulders and a mantle embroidered with symbols, maize stalks, eagles, spirals of water. Their faces are painted in patterns you recognize from murals, lines that mark them not as ordinary people, but as living symbols of mythic figures. Mainstream historians agree that those selected for sacrifice were often treated with honor, sometimes even revered during their preparation period. In Aztec accounts, certain individuals could be housed, dressed, and fed like nobility for months before the ceremony, representing a deity in public processions. This was not presented as punishment, but as transformation. They were stepping into the role of a divine messenger. One of the attendants adjusts a garland and whispers something that makes the chosen one smile faintly. You catch only a single word. Ready? Whether it's encouragement or confirmation, you can't tell. Your quirky tidbit appears in the form of a boy at the back of the line, carrying a tray with 3 small carved figurines. They're made of amaranth dough mixed with honey, shaped into tiny deities. He keeps glancing down at them with the serious pride of someone holding the world's most important pastries. Some researchers believe these edible effigies were later consumed as part of the rite. Others think they served only as symbolic stand-ins. Historians still argue whether the practice was an early form of ritual sharing or a purely ceremonial gesture. The chosen individuals are led to a shaded area at the temple's side, where mats are laid out. They sit in a loose circle, facing the 4 directions. A priest kneels before each one, touching their foreheads with a sprig of herbs dipped in water, scented with flowers. The gesture is slow and deliberate, the kind of movement that tells you it has been done in exactly this way for generations. The crowd below watches in silence. Even the vendors have stepped away from their stalls to see. This is not spectacle in the noisy sense. There is no cheer, no drum roll for drama. It is an agreement between the city and the cosmos, played out in the language of ritual. One chosen man tilts his head back, eyes tracing the sky above the temple roof. For a moment, he seems almost amused, like someone remembering the punchline of a private joke. Maybe he's thinking about how strange it is that a date on a priest's codex could shape the end of a life. Or maybe he's just noticed that a bird has chosen this exact moment to perch on the temple's edge. Historians still debate the criteria for selection. Were these people captives, volunteers, or chosen by omen? In some cases, evidence suggests all 3 occurred at different times and places. What's clear, standing here, is that no one rushes the process. Each motion, from adjusting a garland to placing a hand on a shoulder, is part of an unspoken script. The hand drum beats again, a low and steady heart. The attendants rise, guiding the chosen ones toward the central altar. The sun catches on their painted faces, and for an instant, you see them not as individuals, but as living glyphs, walking embodiments of the stories carved into the temple's walls. You realize this part of the ritual is not about what's coming next. It's about letting the city see, one last time, the bridge between mortal and divine walking in human form. A hush settles over the platform, and the pace shifts from procession to practice. You're guided toward a side court where shade gathers in quiet pools and the air smells of flowers steeped in cool water. Mats are arranged in a ring. Nearby, baskets hold sprigs of fresh herbs, cacao beans, and small gourds sealed with wax. The world narrows to careful motions: rinse, place, breathe. A priest with a mantle of green feathers kneels and traces a circle on the floor with ash. He sets 4 small stones at the cardinal points, then invites each chosen person to sit so their knees nearly touch the line. You take in the geometry. Nothing accidental, nothing hurried. The circle is a clock, a compass, and a promise at once. Another priest brings bowls of scented water. He dips a bundle of herbs and flicks droplets like a soft rain across forearms and faces. The scent, copal and crushed leaves, feels like a cool hand to the forehead after a hard day. A gentle chant rises, not the grand chorus from earlier, but a close, calming thread that ties breath to breath. This is preparation as kindness, ceremony as steadying. Mainstream historians note that extended fasting and purification often preceded major offerings in Mesoamerica. Participants washed with flower-infused water, avoided certain foods, and kept ritual silences to attune body and spirit. Here, the fast is less about denial than about tuning the instrument before a performance. Even your breathing seems to find the right key. An attendant sets out small cups of cacao lightly spiced, just enough to wake the tongue without exciting the mind. You sip, and the flavor draws a line from bitter to sweet in a single thoughtful curve. A priest smiles. "Balance," he murmurs, and you wonder if cacao is the universe's favorite pep talk. Your first light joke earns you a quick, tolerant glance that says, "Yes, but keep it respectful." Noted. 2 temple runners arrive with bundles wrapped in dyed cotton. The cloth unfurls to reveal masks, thin, painted, meant to be worn lightly. Spirals of blue for rain, slivers of gold for sunlight, a curve of green for maize rising. The attendants lift each mask to the chosen faces, not to hide them, but to overlay them with story. When the mask settles, you realize you're looking at a person and a symbol together, a double exposure that makes the heart stand a little straighter. A priest of the western altar produces a small tray of salt and flowers and touches each forehead with 3 grains and a petal. "Mind, breath, path," he says. The words are ordinary as pebbles, and that's the point. The road ahead is made of steps this small. Historians still argue whether such minimal gestures were shared across regions or varied widely by city, but the underlying idea, purity through small, repeated acts, feels universal enough to cross every causeway. Your quirky tidbit arrives on light feet. An apprentice, nervous as a hummingbird, checks a cord of knotted strands around his wrist. He whispers that the number of knots must match the count of songs planned for today. If a knot slips, they add a song to keep luck from tripping. Whether this is sanctioned liturgy or youthful superstition, no one corrects him. The priests value rhythm. The gods apparently enjoy an encore. The circle widens into a slow-motion walk. You rise with the others and follow a guide through a sequence of symbolic stations around the platform. At the first, a shallow bowl holds water so still it looks like polished stone. Each person leans over it, seeing a face framed by sky and mask. "Know what goes," the guide says softly. He doesn't mean it grimly. He means the day asks for clarity. You exhale and watch the surface forget your reflection, a gentle reminder that water is the best editor. At the second station, hands hover over a small brazier. The smoke moves like a tame river. The guide speaks of breath-trading places with cloud. Incense is the city's way of speaking in weather. A tiny smile sneaks out of you. If emails were smoke, your inbox might finally smell nicer. The joke drifts away like, well, smoke. At the third, a low tray of maize, kernels arranged in a spiral that curls inward to a single stone at the center. The guide places one kernel in each participant's palm. Seed, he says, and no one needs further explanation. Mainstream accounts emphasize agriculture at the heart of Mesoamerican cosmology. Offerings are not separate from planting, they echo it. The spiral reads like a promise of return even when paths curve away. At the fourth, a small bundle of fibers, agave threads twisted into a cord. Each person touches it to the wrist briefly, as if to remember the bond between household and temple, earth and sky, today and the day after. Ties hold gently, the guide adds. It's hard to resist a quiet quip about preferred knot strength, but you let the moment keep its quiet. You continue to a narrow corridor on the temple's north side where cool air gathers. Murals along the passage show figures crossing bridges made of stars, hands extended to figures below. The paint is faint, but the gesture is strong. Connection as architecture. Historians still argue whether such scenes depict mythic journeys or liturgical instructions, but the practical effect is immediate. You walk straighter, as if someone is offering a steadying hand a step ahead. In a niche, a basket holds cotton cloaks embroidered with small, repeating glyphs. Nothing grand, just blessings stitched like gentle rain. An attendant replaces one participant's mantle with a lighter one, muttering kindly about heat and composure. You get the sense that humility is part of the dress code. If pride shows up overdressed, the breeze will take it aside for a word. Ahead, a doorway frames a slice of sky. The guide slows the group and speaks softly about silence, not forever, just for a handful of breaths. The hush arrives with a softness that feels earned. Even the city below respects it, market voices thin, and a bird checks its song like a courteous neighbor. In that quiet, you notice everything. The weight of cloth on shoulders, the cool of stone underfoot, the delicate sweetness of a last petal brushed across a wrist. A widely accepted fact. Offerings were often preceded by confessions or reconciliations, small wrongs acknowledged, household knots untangled, debts of feelings squared. The guide does not ask for words. He allows the silence to carry what needs carrying. You watch a chosen woman press her palm to the floor, then lift it with a small nod to no one and everyone. Agreement signed, quietly. The corridor opens onto a terrace where 4 small drums sit like patient animals. An apprentice taps each in turn, east, north, west, south, mapping sound onto space. Rhythm returns as guide and metronome. You feel your shoulder loosen. Even anxiety tends to walk in time when the beat is steady. If a smartwatch tracked serenity, it would buzz to say, "Nice work." The sun reaches a point where the temple's shadow lays a tidy edge along the terrace. A priest raises a hand and the group pauses precisely with the shadow's line. He says a single word that could mean threshold, could mean hinge. Either way, it makes sense. Preparation is not a hallway, it's a door. Before passing through, each participant receives a final touch of scented water, a new sprig of herbs, and, just once, a small joke from the attendant about how even gods appreciate punctuality. Laughter lands like a soft drum roll. Gravity is real, but so is buoyancy. The moment breathes. Historians still argue whether every step in sequences like this was codified or shaped by local tradition. The larger pattern feels consistent: cleanse, align, remind, steady. The smaller flourishes, the extra song for a slipped knot, the apprentice's careful cacao, are the city's signature in the margins. The guide inclines his head toward the central platform. The chosen move forward, no faster than before, but something in their carriage has settled. You notice the way shoulders rest, the way hands open at their sides just enough to read as welcome rather than surrender. Preparation has done its true work. It has made the next step imaginable. You take your place along the terrace edge as the group crosses that line of shadow. The drums keep time, the smoke keeps company, and the city below keeps faith. The path of preparation ends where purpose begins, and for a breath or two, even the sun seems to hold steady to let that change occur without hurry. The terrace narrows into a broad stone stair that leads up to the heart of the temple. The steps are shallower here, but longer, giving the climb a slow, deliberate rhythm. You ascend with the others, the drums behind you softening into a pulse that blends with your own heartbeat. Overhead, The temple facade rises like a horizon of carved stone. Masks of gods, curling serpents, and patterns of maize, all painted in colors still stubborn against the sun. Passing under the great lintel, the air cools instantly. You step into a vast chamber lit by the flicker of oil lamps and the narrow beams of sunlight pouring through angled openings in the walls. The scent here is denser. Layers of copal smoke, crushed flowers, and something faintly metallic from the ritual instruments resting on a side altar. A senior priest gestures for you to stand still, letting your eyes adjust. You take in the room's layout. 4 great pillars encircle a central space, each carved with scenes from myth. Gods raising the sky, ancestors crossing watery underworlds, celestial creatures carrying the sun. Mainstream historians note that Mesoamerican temples were often designed as microcosms of the universe. The floor could represent the earthly plane, the pillars the 4 directions, and the roof the celestial dome. Beneath it all, a hidden chamber or symbolic doorway might mark the underworld's entrance. Here, the altar at the very center gleams under the sun's direct beam, as if the building itself were pointing a finger at this exact spot. Around it, painted glyphs spiral outward like ripples on water, an unfolding map of creation leading back to where you stand. You notice a curious feature in the east wall, a narrow slit cut at an angle, perfectly framing the rising sun. Your quirky tidbit arrives via a nearby apprentice who quietly explains that on certain days, especially during solstices, the sunlight passes through this opening to strike a carved symbol on the western wall. "The gods like good aim," he whispers with a grin. Historians still argue whether this alignment was purely astronomical or also served to signal ritual timing to the entire city. In the dim edges of the chamber, attendants move like shadows, carrying baskets of offerings, cacao, maize, carved jade beads, and painted ceramic vessels. They place each one at specific points along the walls, creating a ring of gifts around the sacred center. It's a choreography of placement, Earth's abundance encircling the altar, human devotion circling divine presence. The priests begin a low chant, each voice finding its place in the weave. You feel the sound before you fully hear it, the vibration rising from the stone into your legs. The words are ancient, thick with metaphor, calling the temple the mountain at the center of the world and the altar the mouth through which the gods drink the dawn. Historians still debate whether these phrases were meant literally or symbolically, but standing here, you suspect the line between the two may not have mattered. In a space like this, metaphor behaves like fact. You don't need proof when the walls themselves seem to agree. The chosen individuals are brought forward, each pausing to touch one of the carved pillars. The gesture is light, almost casual, but you catch the subtle rhythm. East, north, west, south. They're not just walking through a room, they're aligning themselves with the universe's compass before stepping into its center. A priest steps into the sunlight and lifts a vessel high. Inside is water tinted with crushed flowers, its surface trembling. He tilts it slowly, letting drops fall in a ring around the altar. Each drop darkens the stone for a heartbeat before vanishing, a reminder that offerings can be as small as a breath or as vast as the sun. And here's the gentle humor that seems to slip into even the most solemn moments. One drop lands squarely on a priest's sandal. Without missing a beat, he glances down, murmurs something about the gods sharing, and continues. The chuckle that ripples through the attendants is quiet, but it feels like a shared relief, a reminder that humans and gods both appreciate a little levity in the middle of ceremony. The chant deepens, voices now echoing from the stone walls. The sound seems to rise and fall with the flicker of the lamps, shadows bending in rhythm. You feel the chamber itself is part of the ritual, each carved surface reflecting sound, light, and meaning back into the center. One of the younger priests approaches you and points to the floor just outside the altar's beam of light. "This," he says softly, "is where the sky meets the underworld. Stand here, and you are between every place there is." It's the kind of statement that sounds like poetry until you realize the architecture is built to make you believe it. Outside, the sun climbs higher, and the beam begins to shift. The senior priest raises a hand, signaling that the moment to move toward the next phase is close. Attendants collect the baskets, leaving the altar surrounded only by the gifts that will remain until the ceremony's end. The chamber feels smaller now, not because it has changed, but because the air has thickened, the way a room does before a long-awaited word is spoken. You take one last glance at the pillars, the glyphs, the beam of light marking the world's heart, and step back as the priests gather in a ring. The temple's role is clear. It is not just a building. It is the meeting point of every path, every prayer, every breath offered today. The senior priest lowers his hand, and the chant dissolves into silence. Not the casual hush of a market winding down, but the deep, weighty pause that follows when everyone in a room inhales together. You feel it in your ribs, the expectation holding still in the air. From a shadowed alcove, two attendants emerge carrying a large bundle wrapped in woven cloth. They set it down at the edge of the altar and carefully unwrap it, revealing a set of ritual instruments. You notice each piece is laid out with almost obsessive precision. A polished obsidian blade catching stray glints of sunlight, a conch shell with its mouth hollowed for blowing, carved wooden flutes, and small bowls filled with powders and petals. Mainstream historians note that obsidian, volcanic glass, was considered sacred in Mesoamerican cultures, its cutting edge sharper than steel, and its black surface a symbolic link to both the night sky and the underworld. In the hands of a priest, it was not just a tool but a bridge between realms. Your quirky tidbit appears when one attendant, clearly new to the role, accidentally places a bowl of flower petals slightly off-center. The senior priest pauses mid-prayer, raises an eyebrow, and, without breaking the rhythm, nudges it into perfect alignment. "The gods appreciate symmetry," he murmurs. Somewhere in the shadows, a quiet chuckle escapes from another attendant. The chosen individuals are guided closer now, each one pausing at the altar's edge. A priest steps forward with a small clay cup filled with a liquid that smells faintly of cacao and spice. They drink in turn, some taking small sips, others draining the cup in one confident motion. Historians still argue whether this drink was purely symbolic or if it contained psychoactive ingredients meant to heighten the participants' spiritual state. Outside, the drumbeat begins again, slower, more deliberate than before. The sound rises through the temple's walls, vibrating in your chest like the pulse of something ancient and enormous. In between beats, you catch the faint call of a conch shell from a distant tower, its tone carrying across the entire city. The priests form a semicircle around the altar, their garments shifting like the petals of a great flower opening to the sun. The light in the chamber shifts as a thin cloud passes outside, briefly dimming the beam that strikes the center. For a moment, everything feels suspended, as if the ceremony itself is holding its breath. Then, in a voice both gentle and commanding, the senior priest begins a new chant. The words are older than the stones, invoking the gods of rain, maize, and the sun's endless journey. The sound moves in waves, building and receding, each verse answered by a deep hum from the gathered priests. One chosen woman closes her eyes, swaying slightly to the rhythm, her face serene. You notice a faint smile, as if she's hearing a melody meant for her alone. Another participant glances toward the sunlight streaming through the angled slit in the wall, perhaps seeking confirmation from the sky itself. Historians still debate the precise role of each chant, whether they were literal instructions to the gods or more like offerings of beauty meant to please them. What is clear is the effect. The entire chamber feels wrapped in sound, every surface resonating with meaning. At the far wall, an attendant kneels beside a brazier, adding more copal resin to the coals. The smoke thickens, curling upward into ghostly shapes that twist and dissolve near the roof. The scent is sweet, almost intoxicating, and you catch yourself breathing more slowly, your thoughts softening around the edges. One priest begins to play a low, steady note on the conch shell, each tone rising like a call across the horizon. It's answered by another shell somewhere outside, and then another. A network of sound stretching across the city, letting everyone know the ceremony is entering its most sacred phase. And yet, even in this solemn moment, humanity slips through. A young acolyte standing near the door sneezes loudly, startling the man beside him. Without missing a beat, the senior priest says in a dry tone, "The gods have heard your offering," and the tension in the room breaks for just a heartbeat before settling again. The The participants are now positioned around the altar, facing inward, each aligned with one of the cardinal directions. The senior priest steps into the center, raises both arms, and lets his voice fall into a whisper, words only those closest can hear. Whatever he says, it makes the chosen ones bow their heads in unison. The drumbeat fades, replaced by the sound of flutes weaving a slow, rising melody. The air feels dense, almost tangible, as though you could push your hand through it and find resistance. You realize you are watching the point where preparation ends and transformation begins, the space between intention and act. Here, in the quiet heart of the temple, everything that follows will move with the inevitability of the sun crossing the sky. The flutes taper off into a single lingering note, so faint you can't tell whether it fades into silence or simply merges with the air. Then comes the sound of bare feet brushing stone, the chosen individuals stepping forward in perfect unison. It's not a march, not quite a dance, but something between the two, a measured rhythm designed to echo the turning of celestial cycles. You shift slightly to see better. The participants now stand almost touching the altar, their hands resting lightly against the edge. The senior priest moves behind each of them in turn, placing a hand on their shoulder. It's a brief, deliberate gesture, more like a seal than a comfort. Mainstream historians describe this as the moment of binding, when the participants are symbolically tethered to the gods, their role in the ritual fixed beyond reversal. A curious detail catches your eye. Each person is now wearing a garland of fresh marigolds draped over their shoulders. One attendant whispers to another that the flowers aren't just decorative. Their strong scent is said to guide spirits along the right path, ensuring they don't wander into the wrong realm. Your quirky tidbit arrives when the smallest garland, clearly made for someone with narrower shoulders, is mistakenly given to the tallest participant. The flowers sit awkwardly high, and even in the solemn glow, you spot a tiny smile tugging at the corner of the man's mouth. The senior priest begins to speak in a voice that's not loud, yet it fills the room. His words weave together creation myths, seasonal cycles, and the endless dance of life and death. Historians still argue whether these speeches were memorized word for word or improvised within a sacred framework. What's certain is the effect. You feel as though he's describing a pattern that stretches far beyond the temple walls, one in which you, too, are a thread. Outside, the conch shells sound again, their calls now closer together, like waves lapping faster against a shore. The light through the angled wall slit shifts a fraction, the beam tightening on the center of the altar. An attendant kneels to adjust a small mirror of polished obsidian so that it reflects a glimmer of sunlight upward, a faint star glowing on the ceiling. The chosen participants close their eyes. A soft humming begins among them, almost imperceptible at first. It grows layer by layer until it blends with the rustle of their garlands and the distant heartbeat of the drums outside. You realize they're aligning their breath with the rhythm, inhaling and exhaling together like a single living thing. Then the senior priest moves to the altar's eastern side. He takes a bowl filled with maize kernels, gold, red, and black, and scatters a small handful across the altar's surface. The kernels roll, some stopping against the carved glyphs, others falling into the shallow grooves that channel them toward the center. You've read that maize was not just food to the Aztec and Maya, but the very substance of humanity in their creation stories. Here, each kernel feels like a miniature sun, an offering of life back to the source that gave it. From somewhere near the back, a younger priest carefully strikes a pair of small clay drums, producing a deep, resonant tone that seems far too rich for their size. You catch yourself swaying slightly, and then realize everyone in the chamber is doing the same, as if the sound has bypassed the ears entirely and gone straight into the spine. One more smile-worthy moment. As an attendant pours water from a decorated gourd into a ceremonial bowl, a single drop lands on the stone and begins to wander toward the altar like it knows the way. The priest notices, murmurs, "Even the water seeks the gods," and the acolyte beside him stifles a laugh. Historians still debate the sequence of these actions, whether scattering maize came before the final invocations or after, but in this chamber, order seems less about chronology and more about harmony. The beam of light narrows further, as though the sun itself is leaning in to witness. The senior priest lifts his arms once more, his shadow stretching long across the floor. You can sense it. The ceremony has reached the moment just before the tide turns. From the chamber's threshold, you look down into the plaza, and the city looks back, thousands of faces turned upward like a field of pale blossoms. The sound that reaches you isn't noise so much as texture, the hush of woven sandals settling, the murmur of breath moving in slow agreement, the soft chime of shell bracelets when someone shifts. A line of attendants opens a path in the crowd, with reeds tipped in white down, and people draw back without being told. The plaza understands choreography the way a flock understands wind. You move along the parapet as a herald steps forward on a smaller terrace below, raising a fan painted with red spirals. He doesn't shout, he bends the day with rhythm. 3 tones on a wooden slit drum, pause, 3 tones again. Groups answer by kneeling in waves, like grass when a breeze combs it. A woman tucks a strand of hair beneath her headcloth and closes her eyes. The man beside her settles a child against his shoulder. The city is practicing stillness, not emptiness, but the steady kind that holds a shape. Mainstream history makes this plain. Great temples across Mesoamerica fronted vast plazas designed for mass ritual, and public participation was integral, clapping, kneeling, singing, and answering conch calls that stitched household to temple. Murals at Bonampak show ranks of musicians and dancers at courtly rites. Aztec codices depict processions where ordinary people carry flowers and paper banners behind the priesthood. Watching from here, you see why the sources dwell on scale. Belief has architecture, and today the architecture is full. Along the plaza's edge, vendors have folded their mats, but not their kindness. A boy passes clay cups of cool water from a jar shrouded in wet cloth. He tips his chin toward the temple as if toasting the sky and earns a smile from a grandmother with the sternest cheekbones you've ever respected. You catch a drifting thought. Somewhere, someone always becomes the unofficial water minister. If there were lanyards, he'd have one. A low chorus begins, not from the priests now, but from the people themselves. It's a simple syllable, shaped to rise and fall like breathing. The sound gathers confidence as neighborhoods find the pitch. You can tell where the shell workers stand by the brightness of their tone, where the porters stand by the basso hum that seems to vibrate the paving stones. Your feet want to join, but you find the middle ground and hum under your breath, the diplomatic zone between enthusiasm and acoustical mischief. From a balcony across the square, dancers in cotton capes step into view. Their feet barely leave the ground. The movement is all in hips and hands, a ripple passed outward along a line. They hold paper banners cut into sunbursts and droplets, and when they tilt them just so, the breeze writes the day's thesis statement in fluttering strokes. Rain returns when the world is in rhythm. Historians still argue whether such community dances counted as offerings in their own right, or as visual prayers meant to persuade the gods with grace, but the effect on the plaza is immediate. Spines lengthen, faces soften, 1,000 shoulders exhale. Your quirky tidbit ambles in wearing bells around its ankles. An elder with a tiny gourd rattle moves from group to group, tuning people with 3 gentle shakes over each head. A young man explains, deadpan, that this ensures the gods hear everyone in the correct key. Is that doctrine or dad joke? Hard to say. The elder's wink suggests the latter. The community's calm suggests the former is also welcome. Closer to the temple base, 4 braziers send thin columns of copal smoke upward. Attendants lift handfuls of fresh petals, marigold, white lily, fragments of blue-dyed cotton, and sprinkle them in widening arcs that meet like rivers. The color shifts the plaza's mood from waiting to willing. You hear a soft ripple of laughter when one attendant's basket takes an abrupt interest in the wind and becomes a brief, fragrant comet. He bows to the sky as if to say, accepted, and rights the basket with a flourish. Even ceremony likes a well-timed recovery. A herald lifts a conch. The note that follows is long and coppery, a line you could hang a city on. Groups answer by touching right hand to chest, an agreed sign that needs no grammar. A second note sends left hands outward, palms down, a gesture like pressing a wrinkle from cloth. A third note draws both hands to the brow, and for a breath the plaza resembles a single person thinking carefully. Historians still argue whether these gestures map to specific invocations or simply rehearse the posture of offering. Either way, you feel alignment settle like dew. At the rear, a row of drummers begins the gently insistent heartbeat you now recognize as the city's metronome. The big vertical drums, huhuetl and nahuatl, cousins to long-voiced log drums elsewhere, carry the low line. The slit drums add speech-like taps, as if telling the feet where to place the next idea. A toddler, captive on a hip, starts conducting with 2 fingers and a level of authority you would happily hire for any meeting. The mother keeps time with her chin. You picture future historians concluding that toddlers led the ritual, tempting thesis. A modest humor passes between you and the day. A trader near the front wears a feathery charm that keeps tickling his ear at the most solemn moments. He resists scratching, then gives in with the discreetness of a man negotiating with a mosquito. The compromise is elegant. Dignity remains employed. You glance back to the platform where the senior priest stands in profile, face turned toward the angled beam of sunlight. He does not address the crowd directly. Instead, the crowd addresses him by being here, by breathing in measure, by answering conch with palm and rumor with song. This is the silent agreement at the center of public ritual. The priest climbs, the people lift. You realize the plaza supplies structure for the meaning to land safely, like hands ready beneath a descending weight. Mainstream fact anchors the site. During great festivals at the Aztec Templo Mayor, sources describe processions that wound from district shrines to the central precinct, each calpulli, neighborhood group, bringing offerings of food, paper, and flowers, participating in songs that mirrored the priest's invocations. The city didn't watch worship, it performed it. You can feel that performance under your skin, old and efficient as breath. A breeze arrives with the scent of earth after water, though you're not sure whether rain has fallen somewhere nearby or the incense has learned a new trick. A woman lifts her face to the wind and smiles without opening her eyes. Beside her, a mason taps a small rhythm on his knee, probably without knowing it. Every craft carries its own metronome in the bones. You find yourself counting the spaces between drum beats the way you sometimes count steps to steady a thought. The plaza has taught you how to wait. From the temple, a new sound. Flutes answering each other in pairs, one high, one low, calling and replying like daylight and shadow. The crowd doesn't sing now. It sustains the quiet, which is harder. Silence has weight when so many hold it on purpose. In that shared stillness, you can hear small things. A bead sliding on a cord, a cloak's hem lifting, the little click when a child's teeth meet a kernel of roasted maize she was definitely not supposed to bring. Someone's grandmother squeezes a hand, forgiven. Historians still argue whether crowds gathered from devotion freely given or from obligation under watchful authorities. You see a third possibility in the faces, participation as belonging, not coerced, not mindless, but chosen because the city's story is most itself when many tell it at once. The agreement isn't signed in ink, it's signed in steps, in breaths, in 1,000 small nods. Near the back, standard bearers tilt their poles so the banners ripple like water. The cut paper shapes, suns, drops, tiny maze spirals, flicker against the sky, and for a moment the plaza looks like it's under a shallow, shining river. A teenager leans into his father's shoulder and whispers something that earns a hushed laugh. You catch only the tone, which says, "This is big, and we are small, and that is okay." The conch sounds once more, shorter now, a hinge noise. The crowd rises as one, then settles again on the final beat. You notice the edges of the plaza filling with quiet tasks resumed. A water jar passed to a neighbor, a shawl adjusted over a sleeping child, a runner poised at the gate for the next signal. Devotion, it turns out, has auxiliary verbs, carry, shade, share. On the platform above, petals lift on a sudden draft and drift outward, a light snow of color crossing the gap between temple and people. Hands open to catch them, and some petals stick to damp palms, leaving smudges of yellow and red. You see a young boy examine the pollen on his skin with grave satisfaction, as if the day has personally signed his attendance. Then, the plaza settles into the subtlest sound of all, the sound of waiting done well. The crowd side of the ceremony, assent, attention, answer, is complete. What remains belongs to the platform above, to the chamber where breath meets myth and symbol steps forward. You draw your own breath into the shared rhythm, feeling the city hold the space like cupped hands around a candle's flame. The conch note fades. Wind takes a last slow turn through the chamber, and then the sound that follows is quiet work, sandals repositioning, cloth settling, breath returning to ordinary size. The priests do not rush. Closure arrives the way evening does, by degrees with hands that know what they're doing. Attendants step forward carrying basins of scented water and fresh bundles of herbs. A priest kneels at the altar's edge and, with practiced care, sweeps a ring of petals inward, gathering them like the end of a story. Another lifts a small cup and pours a measured line of water along the carved groove that circles the center. The stone drinks, the air loosens. You sense that whatever has crossed between worlds has been acknowledged and set gently down. Mainstream historians are clear on this point. Great rites in Mesoamerica ended with formal acts of purification and closure, incense burned to exhaustion, altars washed, paper banners collected or ash scattered, instruments rewrapped, and offerings placed in dedicated caches. At the Aztec Templo Mayor, archaeologists have found hundreds of ofrendas, deposits of flowers, shells, jade, obsidian, and carved figures, carefully arranged and ritually sealed. Reverence didn't end with the climactic moment. It extended into the way things were put away. A junior attendant approaches the obsidian mirror and tilts it to catch the last, thinnest edge of the sunbeam. For a breath, a small star appears on the ceiling again, dimmer now, like a bedtime lantern turned low. Someone murmurs that the sky is closing its eye. The phrase lands softly. It sounds like a blessing with good manners. You realize the chamber is teaching everyone how to step down in volume without losing the music. On the floor, the marigold garlands are lifted from shoulders and laid in a crescent along the eastern pillar. An elder priest fans them once with a palm leaf, as if sending a final message outward on their scent. The chosen participants, faces calm, masks resting now in the crooks of their elbows, sit upon the mats while attendants touch cool cloth to foreheads and hands. No theatrics, no speeches, just the particular hospitality of water and shade at the exact right time. A small, practical humor slips in when an apprentice arrives late, carrying a broom held like a ceremonial scepter. The senior priest nods with absolute gravity. "The last instrument," he says. A few shoulders ease, even closure gets a curtain call. Near the west wall, two acolytes unfold bark paper slips painted with glyphs and set them alight over a brazier. The flames rise clear and brief, the ash lifting in a fine spiral. You've seen this before at household shrines. Today, it has the weight of policy. What was written is now spoken upward and then politely erased. Historians still argue whether these burned slips preserved lists of names, invocations timed to the calendar, or compact petitions from the districts. Either way, the ash leaves without complaint. Attendants return with small bowls of cacao and thin maize cakes for the priests and the chosen participants. The first bites are taken with care, as if taste itself is a rite that deserves a measured pace. You take in the choreography. Fasting closes with sweetness. Voices return on soft words. Instruments find their nests again. Somewhere inside you, a timer clicks from ceremony to after, and your shoulders admit they are attached to a person. On a side table, the ritual instruments come home piece by piece. The conch rests in its cloth, the flutes in their reed cases, the obsidian blade wrapped in cotton and placed within a wooden box carved with a quiet knot pattern. A quirky detail catches your eye. One box lid bears a miniature footprint branded into the wood. An attendant whispers that the craftsman stepped on it before the resin set and declared the mark good luck. Official doctrine? Doubtful. Workshop legend? Absolutely. The altar receives a final pass of incense. Not a plume now, just a few last grains that send up a sweet sigh. A priest traces a circle in the ash with 2 fingers, then smudges it away with the side of his hand. The motion is gentle. Completion, not negation. The beam of sunlight has crept off the center and thinned to a long, pale thread on the floor. The temple's angled slit, precise all morning, now behaves like a window instead of a clock. Even architecture knows when to rest. From beyond the chamber comes the answering work of the plaza. You hear the soft reawakening of market sounds, the light clack of ladles, and the wicker rush of mats being unrolled. A herald calls 3 notes and thanks the directions in a voice meant for courtyards. The people reply with murmurs that carry a little relief and a lot of manners. The city is very good at tidying itself without pretending nothing happened. Inside, a priest steps to the eastern pillar and speaks to the participants in a tone halfway between lesson and lullaby. He tells them that the path walked today will continue in dreams, that sleep now belongs partly to the gods and partly to the hearth. Historians still argue whether priests taught a formal doctrine of post-ritual journeys for the spirit or whether such counsel belonged to local custom. Either way, the words feel like a hand set lightly on the shoulder. Go on, but go gently. The masks are returned to a cedar chest nested with herbs, each face turned sideways as if listening. A scribe marks a line in the ledger. Garlands offered, waters poured, songs complete. He lingers with the reed pen as though tempted to add, good work by all, and then thinks better of it. You sympathize. Some margins practically beg for applause. A pair of musicians remains by the doorway to send one last braid of sound into the room. 3 notes on the flute, a soft roll on a drum, and the faintest hum that fades into the masonry. It's the sonic equivalent of pulling a door almost, but not quite, closed so air can keep moving. If sound had slippers, it would be wearing them now. Mainstream fact adds a final stone to the picture. After major rites, offerings were sometimes interred beneath floors or within temple platforms. Shells from distant coasts, coral, jade, flint, feathers sealed in clay vessels, a curated microcosm of the world entrusted to the ground. Archaeologists who open such caches centuries later often find order where they expected rubble. North, marked by blue, east by red, things nested by 4 and then by 13. Even the buried portions of the ritual keep the calendar's grammar. Before the party truly disperses, another thin thread of humor finds you. An attendant counts the empty cacao cups, frowns, recounts, then holds up one stray and wonders aloud whether a god liked the flavor and kept a souvenir. The senior priest answers without a blink. Then we were good hosts. Everyone accepts this as both theology and customer service. The last practicalities are done. Ashes cooled and lifted in a cloth to be scattered in a sacred garden, water basins carried out to be poured at the roots of the ceiba, flower petals gathered for drying or returned to the earth. The chamber's lamp flames are pinched to embers. A single wick remains, a small sun to shepherd the room from ceremony back to silence. You step backward with the others, never turning your back to the altar until the threshold meets your heels. Outside, the day looks ordinary again, which is its own kind of miracle. The crowd has thinned to paths of neighbors. Laughter loosens into place without stepping on reverence. Somewhere a child sleeps, chin glossy with a stolen sugar sip. Somewhere a runner leans in a doorway, calf muscles untying their knots. You take the stair down one slow flight and feel the temple's breath settle behind you. Closure isn't a door slamming. It's a room leaning toward stillness until stillness holds. Above, the roof comb cuts a clean line through the blue. Below, the plaza returns to its errands with the grace of people who know that work is also worship when you carry it kindly. Historians still argue whether such rites of ending were meant to reassure the gods, the people, or the priests themselves. Standing here, you suspect the answer is yes, that closure is a circle everyone draws together so the day can put itself away neatly. You glance back once. The last curl of incense unthreads in the doorway and vanishes into noon. You follow a narrow colonnade where shade pools in long rectangles, and the murmurs of closure give way to softer voices meant for smaller circles. The priests step aside from the busy edges of the temple to a quiet terrace that looks toward the eastern sky. Here, instruction replaces ceremony, not what hands do, but what souls become. The air is cleaner on this ledge, thinned by height and by the kind of attention that listens with its whole posture. A teacher priest sits on a low stone with a bowl of water at his feet. He gestures you closer, and a few of the chosen participants, now unmasked, gather with attendants. Up, he says, tapping the rim of the bowl so a small ring of ripples spreads. The path goes up. Then he smiles, tipping his hand, and also inward and also across. The gods are generous with directions. You appreciate the clarification. Even in sacred geography, a good map legend helps. If only your apartment lease came with one half as poetic. He speaks of the sky as a layered place, bright paths for day and quieter roads for night. Mainstream scholarship recognizes that Mesoamerican cosmology often imagined multiple heavens, with the sun traveling visible routes by day and hidden ones after dusk. Venus, too, traced a pattern so important that its appearances and disappearances were recorded like royal visits. The priest names the lights as if reciting a family tree. Sun as elder, moon as companion, the morning star as the clever messenger who can't resist dramatic entrances. He dips his fingers in the bowl and flings a few drops upward. They sparkle, then fall back, and he nods as if the demonstration has behaved. Breath rises first, he says, and everyone inhales without meaning to. Breath remembers the road. To the side, a scribe notes the phrase with the respect of someone who collects good sentences the way others collect shells. A second priest opens a bark paper screen, showing painted steps ascending through bands of color. Earth and greens and browns, a streak of blue for the airy middle, then fields of star-pricked indigo. Figures climb the steps, each touching a symbol: maize sprout, water drop, flame, shell, before passing into the dotted darkness where a great bird bears them onward. Historians still argue whether such codex scenes depict the journey of royal spirits specifically, or a more general road available to anyone properly prepared. The painting doesn't answer. It just keeps being beautiful. Your quirky tidbit arrives courtesy of an older attendant who clears his throat and announces, with the gravitas of a headline, that starlight does not stain robes. He claims this is why night journeys are preferred for anyone wearing cotton that shrinks when wet. The teacher priest tilts him a look that lands halfway between fond and "please stick to the syllabus," and the group's smiles land exactly where they should, soft, then gone. The teacher priest turns the bowl so its surface catches a patch of sky. He speaks of the spirit stepping onto the wind the way a dancer steps into a beat that has always been there. Up the breath road, he says, past the bird school and the clouds that forget. His finger draws a line in the water's reflection, and the small distortion looks oddly like a path written with light. He explains that the first stations in the upward journey are the places where offerings change shape: water to mist, petals to color, smoke to story. What we give on the ground, he says, arrives in the sky as its true name. It sounds like poetry, but the architecture behind him, the angled slit, the patient beam, argues that poetry is a kind of engineering here. You take a breath and feel it behave like a ladder rung. The priest names guardians at the gateways, feathered ones who teach lightness, serpents who teach change, a traveler star that tests patience by arriving exactly when it means to, and never sooner. He warns that impatience leads to looping, and the acolytes nod as if they have personally circled the celestial block looking for parking. You resolve to practice patience the next time a kettle refuses to boil. The gods, apparently, respect a good simmer. A boy, the same apprentice with the knot cord, asks what happens to words said at the altar. They climb too, the priest says, but they must lose their corners. He pinches the air as if rounding off a stubborn consonant. Harshness is heavy, blessing floats. You make a note to round off at least 3 corners before speaking in your next meeting. The heavens, it seems, prefer softly sanded syllables. He moves on. When breath and word have learned skyweight, the spirit crosses to the path of bright waters. He means the Milky Way, a river of stars many Mesoamerican traditions saw as a road for souls and a model for earthly streams. Mainstream fact ties in cleanly. Both Maya and Aztec sources link the Milky Way to the world tree or celestial road. Imagery of a ceiba or great axis appears in art and story as a vertical connector of realms. The priest gestures to a high branch of the ceiba in the plaza below and up to the pale smear spanning the day. Even in sunlight you feel where the river runs. The group listens with the absorbed quiet people give to well-told directions. Some cross swiftly, he says. Some stop to help with the lights. You ask, with a tilt of the head only, what that means, and he answers, those who loved order and timing will keep the sky's ledger for a while. The stars do not place themselves. Somewhere inside you, a punctual calendar app straightens its posture, proud to be cosmic adjacent. He describes the final turn, past the morning star's gate, into the precinct where ancestors come out to meet the newcomer with faces like remembered kindness. No thunder, no brass fanfare, just recognition. They ask what you carried, he says, and you show them what is lighter now. Historians still argue whether priestly doctrine promised specific destinations for different deaths or traced a single road with many inns. The priest refuses to be cornered. All roads end in welcome if walked with balance, he says, which is the sort of answer that feels like the end of a page you don't want to turn. A breeze slips along the terrace and lifts a corner of the bark paper screen. The painted stair flickers. For a second, you could swear the figures are moving, not fast, not dramatically, just at the speed of belief. An attendant presses the edge down again with 2 fingers, very gently, the way you soothe a page in an old book. Pages, paths, petals, everything here seems to understand how to be carried. A young woman who had worn the blue spiral mask asks quietly whether fear matters once the path begins. The teacher priest tilts his head. Fear watches, he says. It cannot lead unless invited. Then, with a dryness that makes a few shoulders bounce, he adds, if fear insists on directions, give it a banner to carry and keep walking. You file this under advice useful in multiple realms. He closes the lesson with a small ritual of pointing. Finger to heart, finger to breath, finger to sky, finger to ground. Up is a word the body says, he concludes. Home is the word the sky answers. He dips a sprig in the bowl and flicks a last arc of water that breaks into tiny suns before they vanish on the stone. As the group rises, a final practical note. The scribe reminds everyone to dream with the window open if the night is kind. Spirits prefer good ventilation, he says, very serious, and somehow you believe him. The terrace accepts a thin seam of laughter, the kind that does not disturb the sky. Down in the plaza, shadows begin to lean the other way. A hawk writes a bright curve and disappears into the glare. You feel oddly taller, as if the lesson has added a quiet story to your spine. The teacher priest rinses his hands, then pours the bowl's last water at the base of a potted ceiba sapling. As above, he murmurs, drink below. The little tree seems to agree, or maybe you're learning to read leaves the way you once read clocks. You step back from the terrace's edge, carrying the map you were given in shapes rather than street names. Breath Road, Star River, Patient Gate, Welcome. Historians still argue whether these teachings were taught to all or reserved for certain houses, whether details shifted with dynasties or held steady beneath changes. What you know, standing here, is simpler. The priests have practiced a grammar for departure that leaves no one speaking alone. Someone behind you clears a throat. It's the older attendant again, solemn now. If you wake at night and feel light, he says, do not worry. It is only your breath remembering. You nod, promising to try that kind of courage. Then you turn toward the stair, where the day waits with errands and small kindnesses, and your feet feel a little less heavy than stairs normally expect. From the high terrace of sky roads and breath maps, you descend along a cooler passage that slopes the other way, downward, toward the rooms where stone remembers water. The air changes first, damp, mineral, touched by a sweetness like old flowers kept in a book. Torches breathe small suns along the walls. A priest gestures you through an arch whose lintel is carved with creatures half plant, half serpent, as if the earth itself is stretching the way a waking animal might. The place feels less like a basement and more like the beginning of roots. Your steps carry you into a chamber whose floor dips to a dark pool. A thin strand of water enters from a crack, writes a sentence in ripples, and leaves at the far edge as quietly as it arrived. Voices stay low here. The sky takes breath, the attending priest says, and the ground takes weight. His palm rests on the damp stone, not pressing, just greeting. You mirror the gesture. The rock is cool and surprisingly friendly, like a neighbor's dog who has already decided you're acceptable. Mainstream historians note that for both Aztec and Maya, caves, springs, and cenotes were portals to the underworld, entrances to realms of gods who govern soil, seed, and the deep waters. Offerings went not only upward but downward, renewing a pact with the powers beneath. Excavations at the Aztec Templo Mayor reveal caches placed deep within its layers. Coral and shells carried from distant coasts, obsidian and flint, jade, frogs, even carefully arranged bones of fish and birds, a miniature ocean entombed at the city's heart. The logic is elegant: to feed earth and water, give them their own names back. Attendants arrive with trays. No drama, just a parade of thoughtful nouns, gourds of maize, strings of shells, small clay figures of frogs and toads, folded bark paper tied with red thread. A young acolyte kneels to place 4 cups at the pool's edge, 1 at each direction, and adds a 5th at the center. "For the road between," he whispers. Your head adds a 6th for snacks. You keep the joke inside because the room prefers indoor voices. You notice a niche filled with stones that glitter faintly when wet. The priest explains they were carried from a river far away and washed here before being set aside. Traveling water, he says, remembers other skies. The idea pleases you. Even stones have passports. Your quirky tidbit arrives when an apprentice confides that one pebble is always slightly misplaced on purpose, so the spirits have something to tidy. Her grin says she knows it's not in any codex, but the habit makes the room happier. Historians still argue whether such small asymmetries were intentional offerings or simply the charming chaos of human hands. Either way, the spirits get a neatness project. The rite begins with a hush. A bowl of ground copal is passed, and each person pinches a small portion, letting it fall into a low brazier that sits so near the pool you can see starry points of ember reflected in the water. Smoke rises, curls along the ceiling, and slips out through a shaft that must meet the open air somewhere far above. The priest murmurs names for the places below: cool rivers, clay corridors, gardens of roots, rooms where seeds listen for the season. You realize the underworld here is not doom, but duty, a layered workshop where life is assembled out of time and patience. He lifts a vessel painted with a dark, toothed face, earth as devourer and mother at once, and tilts a thin stream into the pool. "Drink," he says into the stone. The water accepts the word as if it has heard it before. At his signal, attendants lower baskets on cords, flowers, paper, a chain of shells that clink softly like wind-learning manners. The offerings disappear with hardly a splash. It is tidy work, the opposite of spectacle, more pantry restocking than parade. Mainstream fact anchors the scene. The sacred cenote at Chichen Itza has yielded thousands of offerings: jade, gold, copal, wooden objects preserved by the water, evidence of centuries of devotion cast into a sinkhole believed to open toward Xibalba, the Maya underworld. Similar patterns appear under the Aztec capital, where layer after layer of offerings were buried as the Templo Mayor grew. The vertical grammar is consistent: sky above, earth below, with the city writing to both. An attendant lights a clay lamp shaped like a turtle, and the little flame paints a moving constellation on the ceiling. Someone behind you whispers that turtles carry worlds. The priest half turns. "And schedules," he says, dry as dry can be. The small laughter that follows fits the room like a folded cloth, useful and not too loud. A conch shell sounds, but here the note is muffled, as if played from the end of a hallway. The priest changes meter, speaking slowly, placing words like stones in a path. "We return weight for rain, we return sweetness for seed, we return shine for the road of water." Each line is answered by a ripple against the pool's edge, which you absolutely do not call applause even in your head. The earth has its own way of nodding. At a side bench, a basket of tiny clay tools waits: miniature hoes, little grinding stones, a dusting of powdered maize. Children from the temple school step forward, solemn as scholars, and set one piece each into a shallow niche at ankle height. "Work for the roots," an elder tells them, and they glow with the proud fatigue of doing something important for exactly 15 seconds. You file the phrase away for chores. "Work for the roots" has a better ring than "please sweep." The priest speaks of guardians below, lords with many names who tend thresholds where water turns, who keep count of seeds asleep in the dark. He says nothing about fear. The underworld here is not a place to dread. It is a place to respect, like a kitchen where the bread rises if you don't slam the door. Historians still argue whether this softer picture coexisted with sterner myths of trials and gates. Likely both were true at different times and for different houses. Belief, like water, finds more than one channel. A final sequence unfolds with quiet hands. 4 attendants pour a thin line of water across the floor from the pool to the doorway, then erase it with fresh petals and a sweep of evergreen branches. Path marked, path softened. the priest explains. A road for what comes and goes, a cushion for the passage. He adds a pinch of ground chili to the brazier to wake the noses of the helpful ones, which stings your throat from a respectful distance and makes you blink in sympathy for helpful noses everywhere. He invites you closer to the pool for the last act. Each person breathes gently over the surface and touches a fingertip to the edge. The gesture is barely there, but it knits you to the room. Breath up, he said earlier. Breath down, he implies now. The world is a weave. Sacrifices, in their widest sense, are the threads. You're very careful not to trip. Attendants gather the remaining trays. The turtle lamp is pinched to smoke, the embers stirred until they sigh into gray. The priest presses his palm to the damp floor and then sets that same hand to the wall, leaving a dark print that fades as quickly as a cloud. Scene, he says to the room, to the pool, to whoever is listening through stone. As everyone turns to leave, the apprentice with the misplaced pebble sneaks one more adjustment, setting the stone fractionally more wrong. She catches your eye and raises an eyebrow. You answer with the smallest nod, drafted into a conspiracy of hospitality. The earth, you suspect, enjoys being fussed over as much as the sky does. On the stair back toward daylight, you feel the gradient reverse. Air warms, sounds brighten, the smell of flowers yields to sun on dust. Behind you, water continues its subtle meeting with stone. Mainstream history will call it an offering cache or a ritual deposit. The city calls it keeping promises. Historians still argue whether the scale of gifts below grew in step with political need above, but the rhythm remains clear. To ask rain to arrive, you send a river's memory ahead. At the threshold, a breeze folds around you like a kindly cloak. The plaza beyond has resumed its ordinary genius for going on. You carry the underworld's quiet up with you, the sense of roots arranging themselves, of seeds counting softly, of water rehearsing tomorrow. And as your feet find the brighter stones, you realize the day has learned another way to balance. Breath to the sky, weight to the ground, gratitude in both directions, and, when possible, a pebble placed imperfectly for the joy of tidy spirits. From the quiet patience of water and roots, you follow the priest through a corridor that curves upward again, lit by a rhythm of torches and tiny open windows that blink squares of daylight across your path. The sound of the city grows, footsteps, chatter, the clink of pottery, but it comes in waves, like the hum of a market you're not quite inside yet. Your guide murmurs about the heart house, and the term alone sends a small drumbeat into your ribs. You emerge into a space that's not the main plaza, but a court just off to the side, enclosed on three sides by stone walls painted with shapes you recognize from earlier. Feathers, jaguars, the curling tongue of speech glyphs, and those same half-serpent plants you saw carved above the underworld arch. Here the air is warm, and the sun feels like it has been invited in rather than simply allowed to visit. In the center stands an altar, low enough to be approachable, broad enough for an arrangement of bowls, folded cloth, and obsidian knives that rest like sleeping birds. They gleam even in shade, a reminder that beauty and edge often share the same real estate. Around the altar, a circle of mats has been placed. People are already sitting cross-legged, each with a small basket or gourd in front of them. You're guided to an empty mat where someone slides a shallow bowl toward you. Inside, petals, maize kernels, and a strip of woven cotton no longer than your palm. You resist the urge to ask for scissors, mostly because you suspect the answer would be the sun. Mainstream historians note that many Aztec and Maya rituals unfolded in stages across multiple locations, each with a distinct symbolic focus: sky temples, underworld pools, and intermediate heart spaces where the human community met the divine in more intimate exchanges. This smaller court often served as the place for offerings of food, drink, and crafted goods, which were believed to nourish not just the gods, but also the ancestors and the very fabric of the city itself. A priest in a cloak stitched with turquoise shells begins a slow chant. The words rise and fall in a pattern that makes you think of breathing while walking, the kind you don't notice until you do. Attendants move among the mats, collecting the baskets and gourds. When yours is taken, the priest touches the back of your hand lightly, a gesture that feels both like a greeting and an inspection, as if making sure your pulse matches the room's. Quirky detail arrives via your neighbor, an older woman with a grin that could bend metal. She leans in and tells you that in her village, before such offerings are given, each item is told a joke, so it goes to the gods in a good mood. She claims it makes the rain softer and the maize sweeter. You try to imagine a god receiving a kernel of corn with a punchline and decide you like the image. Historians still argue whether such personal touches were common practice or just regional quirks, but the woman's delivery leaves no doubt she considers it as binding as the chant. Attendants place the collected offerings onto the altar in a deliberate spiral, maize, flowers, cloth, maize again, until the pattern resembles a small galaxy seen from above. At its center sits a cup of cacao, its surface dusted with red powder that catches the light. "Heart drink," someone whispers. You think about coffee, but wisely keep that thought to yourself. The priest dips a finger into the cup and traces a line across the altar's edge, murmuring names you don't recognize but feel like titles. The mainstream fact here is simple but profound. Cacao, often prepared as a spiced drink, held both economic and sacred value in Mesoamerican cultures. It was currency, offering, and ritual refreshment, sometimes reserved for nobility, warriors, or the divine. To share it in a ceremonial space was to share more than taste. It was to pass along prestige and blessing. A pair of youths in feathered cloaks begin to circle the altar, each carrying a small brazier. The smoke is lighter than copal, scented with herbs that make you think of both pine forests and kitchens. As they pass, you're encouraged to wave the smoke toward your chest, as if introducing your own heart to the cloud. The warmth lingers in your fingers longer than you expect. There's a pause, and then the priest begins telling a story. Not a sermon, not a lecture, a story of a time when the sun refused to rise until it was offered something from every household. In the tale, families scrambled to bring what they could: a song, a blanket, a clay whistle, even a pet parrot who, according to the priest, complained the whole way but eventually approved. Laughter flickers through the court. The point, unspoken but clear, is that every gift matters, no matter its scale. You notice that as he speaks, attendants are quietly rearranging the offerings, removing some items from the altar and carrying them to niches in the surrounding walls. These niches are painted red inside, and each holds a small bundle tied with plant fiber. The priest's voice never falters, but the movement around him feels like choreography you've stumbled into without rehearsal. Historians still debate whether these heart house ceremonies were primarily communal, priest-led, or a mix of both. Some records suggest they were moments when ordinary people could step closer to the sacred without the towering formality of the main temple. Here, you can see how belief threads through the crowd like a shared heartbeat, quiet, steady, and inclusive. Another quirky moment, one attendant, perhaps bored with solemnity, balances a maize kernel on the tip of her finger while walking. She catches you watching, winks, and lets it roll into the offering bowl without breaking stride. It's the kind of micro-performance no codex will ever record, but you know you'll remember it. The final act in this smaller court is almost anticlimactic by design. The priest thanks the gathered crowd not in the voice of a distant intermediary, but in the warm tone of a neighbor borrowing sugar. He asks that each person carry a fragment of this moment back to their street, their home, their cooking fire. The heart beats in many places, he says, today here, tomorrow there. The crowd murmurs assent. Attendants extinguish the braziers, the smoke curling upward in lazy spirals that break apart before they reach the open sky. People begin to stand, stretch, and drift toward the exits. Your neighbor with the sharp grin pats your arm. "Tell your gift a joke next time," she advises. "You promise you will, and for once, you mean it." As you step out into the brighter sun, the air feels busier, but not overwhelming. Somewhere behind you, in the shaded court, the altar sits empty but for the faint stain of cacao and a few stray petals, the kind of remnants that will vanish into the dust by day's end. You realize this space works like the pause between breaths, small, necessary, and quietly powerful. And like a heart, it beats whether you're watching or not. You move back into the main temple precinct, and the noise changes. It's sharper here. The clang of copper bells, the calls of vendors hawking food just outside the sacred boundary, the low hum of people trading rumors as if they were beans at market. Somewhere to your left, A man is insisting to anyone who will listen that the sun has been rising faster lately, proof of divine impatience. You decide not to check his math. The broad stairs of the pyramid loom ahead, but instead of climbing, you're guided into a shaded colonnade at its base. The stone columns here are painted in alternating bands of red and white, the pigments still clinging after centuries of weather. You run a hand over one and feel the faint grit of mineral paint, as if the color is still deciding whether it wants to stay. Two priests wait inside the colonnade, their robes edged in jaguar spots. They greet each other with a clasp of forearms before turning to speak with you. Their voices are measured, almost polite, but the undercurrent is unmistakable. This is a discussion, not a lecture. A younger acolyte sits nearby with a reed pen and folded bark paper, ready to record. You settle onto a low bench, wondering if you've wandered into the sacred equivalent of a town hall. Mainstream historians know that debates within the priesthood were not uncommon, particularly when it came to interpreting omens, choosing dates, or deciding the scale of ceremonies. Religion in these cultures was not a monolith. It was a living system of human beings trying to interpret divine will, often through different lenses. And here, you're about to watch it happen. The first priest, his hair braided and tipped with turquoise beads, argues that the gods have been generous lately. Crops have been plentiful, rains have come on time, and no major illnesses have struck the city. In his view, the upcoming ritual should be modest. Symbolic offerings, song and dance, perhaps a small procession. Oh, we must not overburden the gods with gifts they do not require, he says. A full stomach does not always crave another feast. The second priest, older and with a voice like a grinding stone, counters that this prosperity is precisely why a grand offering is needed. The gods give to those who give greatly, he says. To lessen our tribute now would be to invite their attention elsewhere. His tone is not angry, but it has the weight of a storm cloud. The acolyte scribbles furiously, though you notice he occasionally glances up as if mentally siding with one or the other. You feel a strange kinship. Listening to holy men discuss divine appetite is oddly similar to listening to neighbors argue about whether to host a big wedding or keep it small. A quirky detail emerges in the form of a third figure, an elderly woman leaning on a carved walking stick. She isn't a priest, her tunic is plain, but when she clears her throat, both men pause. She offers a story about a time when the priests could not agree, so they asked the gods to decide by sending a butterfly across the plaza. The butterfly landed on the quieter priest's shoulder, and that was that. She smiles as she tells it, and you can't tell whether it's meant as a parable about humility or just her way of reminding them that divine signs can be absurd. Historians still argue whether such non-priestly voices held real sway in temple affairs or were simply tolerated as a nod to community respect. What's clear is that belief didn't flow in one direction only, from priests down to people, but could circulate upward through story, gossip, and gentle intervention. The conversation deepens. They talk about the number of participants, the sequence of songs, even which gods should be named first. One suggests bringing in dancers from a distant allied city to honor the bonds between them. The other worries that too many outsiders will dilute the ritual's focus. You catch the faintest smile on the acolyte's face. This is clearly not their first time down this road. You notice that the debate is never about whether to hold a ceremony at all, only about its scope and intention. That's the unshakable ground beneath their disagreement, the belief that the world requires maintenance through human action and that such action must be deliberate, not casual. As the discussion stretches on, attendants arrive with cups of atole, the warm, thick maize drink sweetened with honey. It's a small courtesy, but you watch as both priests accept their cups without breaking eye contact. There's something almost theatrical about it, like actors refusing to drop character between scenes. Your mind wanders briefly to the butterfly story, and you imagine releasing one into the colonnade right now, just to see where it lands. You also imagine the acolyte discreetly recording that you were the one who brought it in, not the kind of footnote you'd want following you through history. Eventually, the priests agree to seek an omen, a shared decision that will allow them to postpone the final choice until a sign arrives. This, you realize, is the religious equivalent of "let's sleep on it," though in this case it involves reading the pattern of stars or the way fire behaves in a clay brazier. You're not sure if it's compromise or clever avoidance, but it feels peaceful enough. As the meeting ends, the older priest clasps your shoulder and says, "When the gods speak, listen with both ears, one for the sound, one for the silence." The younger adds, "And remember, the silence usually lasts longer." They step away, already murmuring about the next festival. You leave the colonnade into the warmth of the sunlit plaza. The stairs of the pyramid are still there, solid and certain, but the air feels lighter now. You've just seen how belief is shaped not only by the smoke of incense and the glow of torches, but also by conversation, negotiation, and the occasional butterfly. And in its own quiet way, that feels just as sacred. You wander away from the colonnade, following the stone pathway that leads toward the edge of the ceremonial precinct. Here the air changes again, quieter, though the distant hum of the city still seeps through like water through cloth. The late sun is dipping low, its light catching the tips of temple spires and painting them with fire. Ahead, you find a small courtyard tucked between two lesser temples. A single figure waits there, a senior priest in a robe the color of deep night, embroidered with thin threads of gold. He leans on a staff topped with a carved serpent's head, the wood polished smooth from years of use. He gestures for you to sit beside him on the stone bench. For a moment, he says nothing, simply letting the air settle. Then his voice arrives low and steady, the way the first note of a song emerges from silence. He tells you that the public sees the ritual as a transaction, gifts for the gods in exchange for sun, rain, and balance. But for the priests, it is also a conversation, one that has been going on for centuries. "We listen," he says, "and we speak. The offerings are our words, the omens are theirs." Mainstream history confirms that Aztec and Maya priests saw themselves not merely as functionaries, but as intermediaries maintaining cosmic equilibrium. Their role was less about commanding divine favor and more about keeping the channel between realms clear. Then he leans closer, and his eyes sharpen. "But sometimes," he continues, "we wonder if the gods' silence is not absence but patience. Perhaps they wait to see what we will do without instruction." A quirky detail slips into his story, a tale of a priest who once postponed a major ceremony for an entire year because he claimed a hummingbird had told him the timing was wrong. The city went along with it, and when the rains came late but plentiful, the priest was hailed as wise. Historians still argue whether the hummingbird was real, symbolic, or just his way of buying more time to prepare. The old man taps his staff on the stone, drawing your gaze to a small carving at its base, a spiral looping endlessly inward. "The true offering," he says, "is not the maze, nor the song, nor even the heart of a willing one. It is the attention we give to the turning of the world. Most forget that. The ritual is for us as much as it is for them." He stands, motioning for you to follow. Together, you walk toward the precinct's open gate, the day's last light spilling onto the street beyond. The city stretches before you, its market stalls closing, its children chasing each other between adobe walls, its rooftop fires sending up thin smoke that catches the first stars. As you step through the gate, he speaks one last time. "The gods do not only dwell above, they are here, in the spaces between footsteps, in the breath before you speak. Remember that." Then he turns back toward the temple, disappearing into shadow. You stand for a while, letting the city's rhythm wrap around you. The murmurs of people, the soft clatter of pottery, the occasional burst of laughter, all of it feels like the after-echo of what you've seen. You realize that for all the incense, chants, and stone-carved grandeur, the heart of the belief lies in something much simpler. The unshakable conviction that human life is woven into the fabric of a larger, unseen pattern. The sun finally slips below the horizon. In the lingering glow, the temple's silhouette stands against the sky, a quiet sentinel keeping watch until the next conversation with the gods begins. The city softens now, its edges blurring as twilight deepens into night. Warm light spills from doorways, painting small golden islands on the stone streets. Somewhere a flute plays, a tune without urgency, drifting like smoke on a wind that carries the scent of maize and woodfire. You find yourself leaning against a low wall, watching the stars arrive one by one. The air cools, brushing gently against your skin, and the noise of the day fades into the hush of evening. Even the great temple, so fierce in the sun's glare, now glows gently under the moon, its sharp lines softened into something almost tender. You think of the old priest's words, of offerings as conversations, of silence as patience. You let them settle in your mind, not demanding answers, but allowing their weight to rest there, steady and calm. Somewhere beyond sight, another ritual will be planned, another song will be sung, another prayer will rise into the air. But here, in this moment, there is no urgency to act, only the simple act of being, breathing, listening, feeling the slow turn of the night. The city breathes with you. The stars lean closer. The wind moves softly through the courtyards, carrying whispers you don't need to understand. And you know that, for now, the world is in balance, and that's enough. Close your eyes. Let the sound of the flute guide you deeper into stillness. Let the warmth of the day linger in your bones. Somewhere, unseen, the gods are listening, and so are you.